Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome back to another episode of the Mysticism Decoded podcast. I am your host, Aleph Lev. In today's episode, we're going to be getting into the main reason why this entire document, the Gateway Process, was commissioned in the first place, and that has to do with what is called remote viewing, which was a government program essentially created for the purpose of psychic spying. And as we'll see, it allows a skilled participant to look at any event in the past, present, or future. Now, I know that this might sound like sci-fi if you have no context or understanding of this document, or if this is the first pod you have watched from me. But I promise if you stick throughout the video, you're going to understand it in greater depth. And then I have a trailer to play for you guys for a movie that was made that has everything to do with remote viewing called Third Eye Spies. And this was put together by some of the fathers of remote viewing, which would be Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff. Or Hal Puthoff at least has a cameo in it, but Russell Targ is the main player who put the movie together and is also one of the main individuals in the history and science of remote viewing. So in the last pod, we actually covered C, D, and F. And I had said that section E, remote viewing, was a little out of place because it has more to do with sections G and H. So we're going to start with section E. F was in the last pod. You can catch up there if you like. But let's get right into this. We're going to discuss remote viewing, how and why it works. And then we're going to check out this trailer as well to bring it all together. So here we go. In addition, the energy bar tool is used as a portal for initiating a follow-on technique called remote viewing. In this context, the participant turns his bar of energy into a whirling vortex through which he sends his imagination in search of new and illuminating insights. The apparent purpose of the symbolism involved in the vortex seems to be to cue the subconscious and convey to it instructions as to what the participant wishes to do, but in terms of nonverbal symbols, which the right hemisphere of the mind is capable of understanding. So this is more of a derivative add-on interpretation or understanding of remote viewing. It's not a very direct definition of the government program for which this entire document was commissioned, which had to do with creating the ability to psychically spy on America's enemies, which also came about because the United States was made aware that Russia actually already had something like a remote viewing project going on. So it was essentially commissioned to counteract what Russia had already and to understand the how and to why it works. So it's not a question as if, does this work? It's a question of, okay, it works, how and why, and all the other wisdom and gems that we get in this document are there because they explain the how and why. But let's get right into section G now, and now we're getting into some pretty good stuff. So section G, focus 15, travel into the past. All of the preceding techniques are conducted at the level of expanded awareness, known as focus 12. However, the technique of time travel into the past involves further expansion of consciousness through the inclusion of additional levels of sound on the hemisync tapes. Some of the sound is probably merely an intensification of the basic hemisync frequencies being designed to further modify brainwave frequency and amplitude. Other aspects of the added sound patterns appear to be designed to provide subtle, almost subliminal suggestions to the mind as to what is desired by way of further expanded consciousness, so as to support the verbal suggestions and instructions also contained on the tape. Even the instructions are highly symbolic, with time being visualized as a huge wheel in the universe with various spokes, each of which gives access to a different part of the participant's past. Focus 15 is a very advanced state and is extremely difficult to achieve. Probably less than 5% of all participants in any given gateway experience actually fully achieve the Focus 15 state during the course of the approximately 7 days of training. Nonetheless, Monroe Institute trainers affirm that with enough practice, eventually Focus 15 can be achieved. They also state that not only the individual's past history is available for examination by one who has achieved Focus 15, but other aspects of the past with which the individual himself has had no connection may also be accessed. I'm going to read section H as well, and then I'll summarize G and H together. So section H, Focus 21, the future. The last and most advanced of all the focus states associated with the Gateway Training Program involves movement outside of the boundaries of time-space, as in Focus 15, but with attention to discovering the future rather than the past. The individual who has achieved this state has reached a truly advanced level. Except in unusual circumstances, it is probably not attainable, except by those who have conditioned themselves through long application of meditation, or by those who have practiced long and hard through use of the hemisync tapes for a period of months, if not years. So, to understand why it is that someone can actually remote view the past or future, we have to touch on again a topic that we discussed earlier in this pod. And this goes back to the esoteric nature of this document, and of course connects back to the book that I wrote, Connect to Source, which compares this CIA document, The Gateway Process, to the first book of Kabbalah called the Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation in English, and specifically focusing on the parts that have to do with the genesis of the universe, the parts that have to do with the creation of the golem. We started to cover in further depth in episode 15, which had to do with this very important section of patterning. But I'm not going to cover that again right now. We're just going to focus on the aspects of the Genesis. So I'll just start to summarize in case this is the first time you're watching one of my videos. But in Kabbalah, we have a term for God called Ein Sof. Ein Sof in Hebrew means no end or infinite. Infinite consciousness, infinite creativity, and what I submit to you is infinite speed of vibrations, which allows for a state of all potentiality, being in all places at all times, knowing all things, and being eternal. Now, energy in infinity is the opposite of energy that is not in infinity, or we can call that confined energy. So energy that has been confined or slowed down is essentially what makes up our universe and reality. So as we understand from this document and also the Sefer Yetzirah, that whenever God chose to create the universe, he had to slow down his energy to create it and to create all things that have form and individuality. So what makes you, me, your computer, the computer, a mountain? It's that it's vibrating at a certain frequency. And each frequency is a variant from a separate frequency, which allows for form and individuality. So let's say that I'm vibrating at 97.1, you're vibrating at 97.2. We have form, individuality, we're separated. And as a byproduct, we have location, because confined energy is no longer eternal, it is slowed down. And as a byproduct, it has location. And this is why we have our own form and individuality, and we are separated from that infinite energy, that God consciousness. Now, if you apply this to the universe itself, we are meant to understand that out of this infinite energy, God, at first, to create the universe, had to create a sort of void where the confined energy of the universe was going to stand. So what we're really talking about is, out of, let's say, the body of God, which is the infinite energy that consumes all that there is, part of it needs to be slowed down and carved out. And now this carved out area is where the universe stands. This is what is known as the torus. The cosmic egg is here. Now that we have this hollowed out, carved cosmic egg, in order to create all the events that there are going to be throughout what we consider the beginning of time to the end of time, God had to fill in this hollow void with what we understand to be wave interference patterns. These wave interference patterns are basically the energy forms and shapes that delineate the events that occur throughout history. Now, this is getting a little bit into predeterminism versus free will. Separate advanced topic, but we have limited free will. I talked about this on prior pods, where in certain windows we are given the opportunity to make our own choices, and then once we do, we are locked into another predestined path, so to speak. But whenever we are not at those windows of having an opportunity for free will, we are just going through the motions and living a predetermined experience. But these events, or these event matrices, you can call them, are essentially wave interference patterns that are placed along the torus, or the cosmic egg. And in order for time to occur and for us to experience events, what is really happening is that matter is now going through the torus, and as matter goes through the torus and intersects with these event matrices, these wave interference patterns, this is really what time is. So time is energy going around the torus. And we talked about this in further depth in prior pods as well, where time is really a measurement of change, and that measurement of change is energy changing and evolving as it goes through the torus. So this is a high-level explanation of what time actually is and why you could think about it as something physical. But now that we've established that in the beginning, in Genesis, first God had to hollow out a void where the universe was to stand, and then that void had to be filled with event matrices. And now matter going through the torus experiences those event matrices, and that is considered the passage of time. But if you focus on the first two aspects of what I just said, that first there was a hollow void, and then it was filled with wave interference patterns, and time is only energy going through that, we understand that all of time exists simultaneously, and it is just time, energy passing through it that we understand as the passage of time. But the hollowed out void had the event matrices placed there in totality. So what this means is that all of time exists simultaneously. The past, present, and future exists simultaneously. And I'm sorry about my phone ringing there. I thought I had that on silent. So why is it that we experience time moment to moment linearly in our dimension in the way that we do? Now, this is something that I write about in my book in great detail as well. And it has to do with how the fourth dimension interacts with the fifth dimension. And I submit to you that this is described in the Sefer Yetzirah by the word sipur, the Hebrew word sipur, which means to inform. And we come to understand how the fifth dimension governs or informs the fourth dimension. And I'm going to explain that in further depth when I start covering my book in the next series following the gateway process. Or if you don't want to wait, of course, you can go ahead and buy my book on Amazon beforehand. The link is in the description. But that is why we experience time linearly, moment to moment in our time-space dimension, our four dimensions that we are knowledgeable of, length, width, height, time, with time being the fourth dimension. And we experience time linearly as we do because our fourth dimension sits at the very middle or the heart of the fifth dimension, which governs how time passes here in our fourth dimension. So that is something I'll be covering in further depth in the future. But the point is that past, present, and future exist simultaneously. We understand that from the earlier part of this explanation that I'm giving you. So back to the document, remote viewing, how it is that we can look into the past or future. Essentially what we are doing is we are raising the speed of our vibrations past what we discussed in earlier pods as something known as Planck's distance, 10 to the negative 33 centimeters. And when we accelerate our vibrations past Planck's distance, we are able to escape the time-space dimension. Now, there are specific focus levels listed here for being able to view the past and future, where in the past we are given focus 12, and in the future we are given focus 15. So this has to do essentially with the speed of your vibrations, having to have them pass a certain threshold, which you are achieving via the hemisync methodology or transcendental meditation. So back to the wave interference patterns. What is the significance of that? So whenever you accelerate your frequency past Planck's distance, and now you are able to essentially reach those wave interference patterns in the universe, you can read them like Braille. So this is what is referred to in modern parlance as the Akashic records. So imagine the Akashic records as something similar to Braille. something that can be read via its patterns. But like a blind person reads Braille by sliding their finger over the pattern and recognizing the pattern with their finger, in this case, you are recognizing the wave interference pattern with your energy, with your soul, and it is your energy, your soul, that is reading these energy wave interference patterns. So that is why you can essentially see or read the past, present, or future, because they exist in the Akashic records as wave interference patterns, and you are just reading them. But you have to reach these thresholds, focus 12, focus 15, to do so. And the other thing to keep in mind is that even when you're reading them, you're reading the past, present, or future to a very high probability, but not 100%, because like I mentioned, there are windows of free will that individuals have a choice, and then based on the choice that they make, a new predestined path is then traversed. So it is only to a very high probability anytime you read the past, present, or future, but it's not a 100% guarantee because of the free will paradox. And something that we come to understand as well is that there are infinite timelines for which every high probability outcome plays out. So this is something that we've discussed a bit on prior pods, and something we're going to discuss in further depth on future pods when I start covering my book, and also whenever I start to really dive deep on a concept known as God-mind architecture. But I hope that explanation made sense for you guys. And now I want to play this trailer to help bring it home. And this, again, is the movie Third Eye Spies, which is definitely worth watching. I did watch it. It was pretty cool. And let's give it a listen to right now.
If you had an ability to be able to remotely perceive stuff any place in the world, that could be an extraordinary intelligence source.
We found that many individuals are able to accurately describe what's going on in distant locations.
Are you saying that the work you've been doing is classified?
It was a research facility. That was all that we were going to tell them.
The Russians have been spending millions of dollars investigating so-called ESP.
Psychic spies. Almost a psychic arms race here. Is there any real application to this?
I think remote viewing has been demonstrated over the 20 years of work that's been sponsored by the government.
Producing crucial and vital intelligence to the NSA, CIA, DEA, and the Secret Service.
I began to feel frightened.
The KGB did it, man.
What's really going on here?
State-sponsored assassination attempt.
The CIA was lying.
They wanted to kill the program.
A storm brewing.
This is real.
I say no more secrets.
Let this information out.
Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed that trailer. I don't know why this ad popped up for Sator and wasn't able to go away. So sorry about that, but you still got the gist of the video from the audio, and most of it wasn't blocked out anyway. But things you deal with whenever you deal with YouTube's bugs. So if you liked what you heard on the pod today, I invite you to follow, subscribe, like, share, comment, all those good things that everyone else asks for. This is a new channel on YouTube that I am looking to get out into the world. It's always a great gift to share the nature of reality with a friend or loved one. In the next pod, we are going to continue with section 31, the out-of-body movement. we only have really a few episodes left to do in this series before we move on to the next series where I cover my book and get into the first book of Kabbalah in great depth, the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, the only book to ever be attributed to the patriarch Abraham. And I'm going to connect the Sefer Yetzirah for you to the applicable parts of the gateway process document having to do with the Genesis and the creation of the Golem. If you haven't watched some of my prior pods, and let's say you're only going to watch one more for time being, I really highly recommend watching episode 15 on patterning, having to do with the creation of the Golem. It is so extremely important. The entire world thinks that the Golem is simply mythical and folklore, and I prove to you that it is not. And that is just part one. It is a preview for part two, which is going to come once we start covering the Sefer Yetzirah in my book and we go into more detail on the Golem. But everything that sounds like sci-fi to you, keep in mind that we live in the imagination of God's mind, and our reality is God's imagination crystallized, made dense and physical, so that just like a digital computer simulation, anything is possible. And the same way smart people who are not spiritual describe our reality as a digital simulation, I am telling you, I am submitting to you, it is just like that, except we don't exist in a computer. We exist in God's mind, where we are all confined energy, versus God being in a state of energy of infinity. And we are just portions of God's energy slowed down. And that is the tale of the tape. So thank you again for joining me on this pod today. Till next time, Aleph Lev out.